Hi, welcome to our YouTube-friendly version of NTD News. What you'll see here is only the content that YouTube allows. For our complete, uncensored broadcast, head on over to ntd.com. See you there. Tropical Storm Lee in the Atlantic is fast approaching major hurricane strength, and it could become life-threatening. The storm is about 1,200 miles east of the northern Leeward Islands, which are in the Caribbean Sea, and it's moving toward the west-northwest with sustained winds of 70 miles per hour. The National Hurricane Center warns it's gaining strength fast and is expected to become a hurricane later today and a major hurricane into the weekend. Current projections show it not making landfall but passing just northeast of the British Virgin Islands. But swells brought by the hurricane could cause life-threatening surf and rip current conditions. No coastal watches or warnings are in effect at this time. Lee is the 12th named storm of the Atlantic hurricane season, which runs from June 1st to November 30th. President Biden's son Hunter may be charged with a felony gun crime, according to the Justice Department. This is the same crime that caused his prior deal with federal prosecutors to fall apart. In a filing today, Special Counsel David Weiss says prosecutors plan to ask a grand jury to indict Hunter Biden for the crime soon, possibly as early as the last Friday of this month. Prosecutors have said the younger Biden possessed a firearm in October 2018, despite being addicted to an illegal drug. That's a violation of federal law. Biden's team had previously reached a deal with the DOJ for 2 tax charges. When the judge asked for clarification if it covers the gun charge, the deal fell apart. Now, Hunter Biden's lawyers are expected to submit their own filing by the end of the day. A conviction could land him in prison for up to 10 years. A Georgia judge today said he was skeptical that prosecutor Fani Willis could try all 19 defendants together in October. He said the entire case could be at risk since they're still waiting to find out if it will be moved to a federal court. NTD's legal correspondent Arlene Richards has more.
It sounds like the state is still sticking to the position that all these defendants should remain.
Fulton County Judge Scott McAfee expressing doubt on Wednesday that Fani Willis could try all 19 defendants together in her sprawling RICO case against former President Trump and 18 others.
I remain very skeptical, but we can. I'm willing to hear what you have to say on it.
The prosecution argued that Ken Chesbrough and Sidney Powell's request to have separate trials should not be allowed.
Judge, we contend that we must prove the entire conspiracy against each and every one charged.
Special Prosecutor Nathan Wade said all 19 defendants had to be tried together. He said the judge would have to decide whether or not he wanted to hear the same case 19 times. Wade estimated how long the trial would take.
Firstly, we would contend that a trial of these 19 co-defendants will take 4 months.
He said that would include in excess of 150 witnesses testifying, not including if the defendants decide to testify. And that the 4 months also didn't include jury selection. With a speedy trial date coming up in October, Judge McAfee questioned whether or not all 19 defendants could come together in 47 days. But he also had another concern.
One of the first things I kind of want to talk through is potentially how removal affects this.
Some defendants have asked a district court judge to move their case to federal court based on their status as federal officials during the alleged time period. Judge McAfee said a conviction in the state trial will be put on hold while they wait to hear the federal judge's decision. And if the federal ruling is appealed, that wait could be even longer.
Right. So it could potentially, even optimistically, be a 6-month turnaround just for the 11th Circuit to come up with a decision.
The judge said it might be risky to push forward. He's also concerned about a lot of pretrial motions and questioned how they could handle motions from all 19 defendants in 47 days. In the end, Judge McAfee denied Chesbrough and Powell's motions for separate trials and asked the prosecution to submit additional papers explaining how they will try 19 defendants in one trial. The prosecution has until next Tuesday to explain. Tiffany?
Now over to former President Trump's other legal cases, a ruling in the E. Jean Carroll defamation case, and a response to Trump's request to delay Attorney General Letitia James' civil fraud lawsuit against his business. A federal judge has ruled that Trump is liable in the second E. Jean Carroll defamation case. That means the jury will only need to decide how much money Trump will have to pay her when the case goes to trial in January. The case centers on Trump's 2019 statements denying he sexually assaulted Carroll in the mid-1990s. And in A.G. James' case, a New York judge has denied Trump's request to briefly delay the trial scheduled for October 2nd. Trump argued the trial should be delayed until the judge considers both sides' requests for summary judgments. In this case, the New York Attorney General is accusing Trump and his business of overvaluing the assets of the Trump Organization. And more updates in the Mar-a-Lago documents case. A key witness has entered into a deal with prosecutors to provide testimony. According to a court filing today, the witness, who is not named, is the head of information technology at Trump's Mar-a-Lago, Florida resort. Prosecutors previously said that the witness had information about efforts by Trump's personal aide, Walt Nauta, and others to obstruct the federal investigation. Prosecutors said in an August filing that the witness initially denied any knowledge of obstruction. The deal to testify comes after Special Counsel Jack Smith's office sent the witness a letter threatening him with prosecution for lying to a grand jury. Senators returned to Capitol Hill, and Republicans are facing questions about whether they want to replace their leader. This after Minority Leader Mitch McConnell had a second episode of freezing mid-sentence during a press conference. NTD's Melina Weiskup has more from Capitol Hill. Melina, tell us about McConnell. How is he doing?
Good evening. So yeah, when we saw Senator McConnell today, he seemed fine, nothing out of the ordinary, pretty normal, nothing abnormal in his demeanor or in his speech. It was just like regular, his low mumbled voice that he always uses, no glitches there, nothing freezing that we've seen twice in the past 5 weeks. So everything was normal. The Capitol physician here has cleared him fully to return back to his duties and ruled out anything neurological or serious. The Capitol physician will read you exactly what he said in this regard. He said there's no evidence that you have a seizure disorder, that you've experienced a stroke, TIA, or movement disorder such as Parkinson's disease. But one huge question still remains, and that is exactly what happened here in these two instances, at least that we're aware of. And that's a question that McConnell doesn't seem to know the answer to, or at least he doesn't want to tell us if he does know the answer. Here's what McConnell had to say to reporters today, as well as how senators in his own caucus are reacting.
Do you know what it is?
I think Dr. Monahan covered the subject fully. You had a chance to read it. I don't have anything to add. I'm going to finish my term as leader, and I'm going to finish my Senate term.
There's medicines you take for seizures. As far as I know, he's not on those.
I'm concerned about Mitch. He's my friend. He's my colleague. He's my leader, and I will continue to support him.
He is fit to continue as majority leader.
So yeah, listen, I voted against him as leader. It's not my choice for leader. It hasn't been, and that hasn't changed.
And as we noted earlier, what's important to note here is this is the second such time that McConnell has frozen that recent freeze that we saw back when he was in his district just a week ago. That was the second time we saw such an incident where he would freeze in the middle of a press conference for up to half a minute, not moving, not blinking, nothing. That's the second time that's happened in the past 5 weeks, at least that we're aware of. So we know this has happened in front of the camera. It's unclear if this has happened behind closed doors. What stands out to some people is the fact that how his staff was reacting. They seemed very calm with this situation, like they had been through it before. So this is also raising some questions. But as you saw from what McConnell said, he plans to finish out his term, which ends in 2027, and he plans to continue serving as minority leader until the end of his term there, which ends at the end of the election cycle in 2024. And also, as you heard from the senators that we heard from, none of them have called on him to step down. We just haven't heard that from the Senate GOP caucus here.
Melina, thank you for that update. And next, more restrictions on oil drilling. The Biden administration is looking to cancel oil and gas leases in a federal wildlife refuge. Environmental groups cheered on the decision, while Republican Alaska Senator Dan Sullivan criticized it. The 7 leases were granted by the Trump administration to an Alaska state agency just one day before President Biden took office. Biden's government has pledged to preserve 13 million acres of land in the National Petroleum Reserve in Alaska. That includes banning new leasing on more than 40% of it. After 4 months into Ukraine's counteroffensive, Secretary of State Antony Blinken made a surprise visit to the country. But while he was there, Russia launched a devastating attack, killing at least 17 people. NTD's Jason Perry has the story and a warning. The following report includes content some viewers may find disturbing.
In what appeared to just be another day at the market in eastern Ukraine, a Russian airstrike killed at least 17 people, including 1 child, in the city of Kostianantinivka. A witness who was working at the time of the attack shared her experience.
Another woman was carried inside by soldiers. She had an open fracture and the bone was sticking out of her leg. She was very pale. She remained conscious but in shock while she was given first aid.
Firefighters were seen putting out fires during the aftermath. Wednesday's deadly attack happened during a surprise visit to Ukraine by Secretary of State Antony Blinken.
Never go to someone's home without bringing a housewarming gift. We come bearing some further assistance for Ukraine.
The White House later confirmed it will provide what is now the 46th additional weapons package for Ukraine since the war began. This latest one is valued at $175 million. During Blinken's 2-day trip, he met with Ukraine's foreign minister.
We want to make sure that Ukraine has what it needs not only to succeed in the counteroffensive, but has what it needs for the long term to make sure that it has a strong deterrent, strong defense capacity, so that in the future, aggressions like this don't happen again.
Blinken also met with Ukrainian President Vladimir Zelensky, who said this.
This is a difficult challenge and difficult, tough period for our society. And always the leaders of the United States, when they come, it's a great message of support.
Just hours before Blinken arrived in Ukraine's capital of Kyiv, Russia launched missiles at the city. But Ukraine's military said its air defense systems shot them all down. When the Kremlin was asked about Blinken's trip, it said the U.S. plans to keep funding Ukraine's war effort until the last Ukrainian. But Russia may soon need to answer more serious questions. The president of Romania says his country's defense ministry is currently investigating drone debris that landed on Romanian soil. And he said if that drone turns out to be from Russia, it would be a serious violation of the sovereignty and territorial integrity of Romania and the NATO allies. Jason Perry, NTD News.
iPhones are banned for members of the Chinese regime. Sources told the Wall Street Journal that China ordered regime officials to stop using iPhones at work. How secure are smartphones in general? Are we being spied on through our phones? NTD's Yuqi Shi investigates.
The Chinese regime is prohibiting officials from using iPhones at work. The Wall Street Journal, citing anonymous sources, says this is a step to enhance cybersecurity. Smartphones in general are not so secure.
Certainly, we are being spied on through our phones.
Cybersecurity expert Scott Schober says the government, the big tech companies, and hackers can access our phones' data. Criminals can, through malware and hacking, access our conversations, photos, and keystrokes. By looking at keystrokes, they can deduce what our passwords are. Numerous signs your phone may have malware. Unfamiliar apps pop up from nowhere. The battery drains very quickly. The phone frequently becomes way too hot, or the phone lights up randomly.
Get some type of malware protection to remove that malware. PC Magazine, every year they rate all the antivirus software, malware protection for both PCs and for your smartphones. Suspicious apps, delete those apps, and you can also do a factory reset.
You don't need to throw your phone away because of malware. These actions can sufficiently solve the problem. We've reached out to Apple for comment, but they didn't respond before airtime. Yuki Shi, NTD News.
The search for the escaped killer in Pennsylvania continues into its 7th day. Authorities in Chester County say they are expanding their search area after another sighting last night.
Last evening, we had another sighting of Cavalcante by a resident in the area of Chandler Road, Pennsbury Township. Teams searched the area for hours but were unable to locate him.
A law enforcement source told CNN how convicted murderer Danilo Cavalcante escaped. Investigators said they believe he got out of the Chester County prison last Thursday by climbing onto the roof and squeezing through razor wire. Another inmate escaped from the prison in a similar manner in May. About 200 law enforcement personnel are searching for Cavalcante in eastern Pennsylvania. They are now hoping to stress him out of hiding. Authorities are continuing to increase the number of personnel involved and are asking for the public's help. Cavalcante was convicted of first-degree murder in the killing of his former girlfriend in 2021. A group of protesters in Atlanta are facing charges under the same Georgia racketeering law that's being used to prosecute former President Trump and 18 others in Fulton County. Those protesters are opposed to a new police facility, which they call Cop City. 61 members of a group called Defend the Atlanta Forest are accused of plotting to halt the construction of the Atlanta Public Safety Training Center. The $90 million facility is set to train police and firefighters. The defendants were charged with violating Georgia's RICO law, the Racketeer Influence and Corrupt Organizations Act. The Defend the Atlanta Forest is accused of coordinated acts of violence, intimidation, and vandalism. A part of the indictment notes that the group has attracted many out-of-state violent anarchists. The protesters and other critics have expressed environmental concerns over the training site and say it could lead to greater militarization of police. For a closer look at the Georgia RICO Act and its applications, we spoke with Jason Johnson, the president of the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Jason Johnson, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you on the show.
Thanks for having me.
Jason, it seems the RICO Act often conjures up images of mob bosses, the mafia, but in terms of these 61 activists who are trying to stop a police and firefighting training facility in Atlanta, how is it being used here?
It's actually a really, in my view, it's a really smart use of the RICO Act because all you really need is to have a conspiracy among multiple actors who are engaging in acts, in this case, relating to destroying property, threatening people, and even causing acts of violence against others relating to this Cop City project, which has ironies of its own because these activists claim to want well-trained police officers and public safety officers, and yet they've done everything possible to try to interrupt building a training facility that brings the hope of better training for law enforcement officers.
And Jason, you mentioned how you think this is a smart use of it, but is there a precedent for using the RICO Act in terms of activists like this?
No, not that I'm aware of, but I mean, these are activists in name, but activism, lawful activism, doesn't involve destroying property and threatening people. So those are acts of violence and intimidation. Those aren't associated with lawful protest activity. Those aren't protected. Those aren't First Amendment protected activities. Those are criminal activities. And the RICO statute is designed to address conspiracies involving criminal activities. So that's why I think it's a good use of the statute.
And Jason, most of these defendants have already been charged. The RICO charges in addition to that and carries a potential heavier sentence. Why do you think prosecutors are adding the RICO charge?
Well, I think it's to address the fact that you have large groups of people who are colluding to engage in mass criminal activity that's interfered with an important state project. I just think that you can't allow that to stand. And the reason that it's added, of course, is to enhance the sentencing. You know, an individual act of a destruction of property is considered a very minor offense that in today's justice system is basically ignored, and there's no it's not addressed. There's no accountability for it. But when you bring even state-level RICO charges, it brings with it enhanced penalties and additional accountability. It's being prosecuted by the state attorney general's office versus the DeKalb County prosecutor's office, which is controlled by a George Soros funded prosecutor. And so in order to get any real accountability, you need to have this prosecution, again, by a state attorney general who's serious about promoting public safety. And I think it'll be effective.
And expanding on your point, the Georgia Attorney General is calling these defendants military anarchists, and it seems other states have grappled with similar cases, especially with, say, Antifa. Could Georgia actually be setting a precedent in how to deal with groups like this?
Certainly it's possible. Not every state is serious about dealing with groups like this. Georgia is. Not every state has a RICO statute. Georgia does. So it'll be interesting to see how it plays out. Not every state will follow suit. I'm certain that most states will continue to foster these groups and allow them to continue to interrupt with commerce and interrupt, important state projects like this. But it'll be interesting to see the outcome, and I think it'll be a good one.
And why do you think those states will continue to allow them?
Well, there are political differences in how people at various ends of the political spectrum deal with anarchists, and we saw that starting in 2020 with chaos that descended upon the cities and what were supposed to be lawful protests after the death of George Floyd. And instead of lawful protests, we saw rioting, destruction of property, arson, acts of violence. And the way that those were addressed across various jurisdictions seemed to correspond with the political leanings of those who were in leadership. And so there are some cities are very really sort of invite the activist culture and are welcome groups like Antifa to be present and foster them in their jurisdictions. And other jurisdictions are more law and order oriented and don't want anarchists to control the streets. And so I think at least at a statewide level in Georgia, we've seen the latter.
Jason Johnson, thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having me.
Cars are failing data privacy standards. A new study says that most major manufacturers admit they may be selling your personal information. We spoke with NTD Business's Don Ma for more details. Don Ma, thank you so much for joining us. Great to have you back on the show.
Yeah, always a pleasure, Tiffany.
So Don, how are cars collecting data?
Well, cars nowadays have a ton of sensors in them. That's things like GPS and telematics systems that can monitor driver behavior, vehicle diagnostic abilities that can monitor your engine, fuel consumption, tire pressure, battery status. And cars now have microphones installed in them, and they have cameras facing inward and outward. But, despite there being a ton of sensors, it seems like drivers are given little or no control over the personal data their vehicles are collecting. And the study is from researchers for the nonprofit Mozilla Foundation, and it reviewed 25 car brands. And, we can talk about how the brands scored in terms of privacy if you want.
I mean, that sounds fun. So how did these 25 different brands score?
Well, Tiff, not so good, because apparently the cars scored the worst for privacy among more than a dozen product categories. That's including things like fitness trackers, health apps, smart speakers, and other connected home appliances. Not a single one of the 25 car brands whose privacy notices were reviewed met the minimum privacy standards of Mozilla. And Mozilla's minimum standards include encrypting all personal information on a car. And the researchers said most car brands actually ignored their emailed questions on the matter, and those that did respond offered partial or unsatisfactory responses. It seems like unless a car buyer now opts for a used pre-digital model, they just don't have a lot of options right now, Tiffany.
And so when it comes to privacy, who are these manufacturers sharing that data with?
So according to the study, 19 automakers out of 25 say they can sell your personal data. And half of them will share your information with government or law enforcement in response to any requests. So in other words, what that means is law enforcement will actually not need a court order to get your data. And besides that, a technology and human rights fellow at Harvard's Carr Center for Human Rights Policy said he made a parallel saying that most cars are like wiretaps on wheels. Tiffany, think about that. The electronics that drivers pay now more and more money to install are collecting more and more data on them and their passengers.
Some concerning finds right there, Donma. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thanks, Tiffany.
And now for your sports news. Here's NTD's Dave Martin with a look at tomorrow's NFL kickoff.
That's right, Tiff. The start of the NFL season is just a day away as the Super Bowl champion Chiefs host the Lions. But Kansas City has a couple of major question marks heading into the game regarding the availability of two of their top players. Now, we're not talking about Patrick Mahomes here, but defensive tackle Chris Jones, who was an All-Pro selection last season, has yet to report to the team while in a contract stalemate. The four-time Pro Bowler spoke to reporters yesterday and said if a deal gets done, though, he could play tomorrow night. Meanwhile, tight end Travis Kelce, a four-time All-Pro selection, hyperextended his knee in practice yesterday. Though the team believes he didn't suffer any ligament damage, his status is questionable. And at the U.S. Open today, second-seeded Aryna Sabalenka advanced to the semifinals with a straight sets win. She'll face the winner of tonight's Marketa Vondrousova-Madison Keys match. Keys, the 28-year-old American, has dropped just one set through 4 matches thus far. Now on the men's side, Andrei Rublev plays this afternoon against third-seeded Daniil Medvedev, who won this event 2 years ago. The winner will face the winner of tonight's Carlos Alcaraz versus Alexander Zverev match in the semifinals. Now the German Zverev, who finished runner-up here 3 years ago, made headlines Monday night when he had a fan ejected for singing the country's former national anthem under Adolf Hitler. Zverev, though, shook off the incident to beat Jannik Sinner in a nearly 5-hour marathon match that ended early Tuesday morning. And for your sports viewing schedule tonight, just 9 baseball games on. But that includes a pivotal matchup in the AL West as the first-place Houston Astros play out the slumping third-place Texas Rangers with just 2 games separating the top 3 teams. And that's it for your sports news today. Tiff, all yours.
And movie magic or a natural wonder, and almost special effects like display, glowing blue waves recently decorated a number of Southern California coastlines, mesmerizing beachgoers for about a week. NTD's Jason Blair spoke with a videographer who was lucky enough to capture the unique phenomenon.
Glowing bioluminescent water along the coast of California recently dazzled visitors in a few areas along the southern coast.
We were really fortunate to find this pool of water that was stationary for a while, and it had tons of bioluminescence in there. So anytime you touch the water, it just glowed like crazy.
Patrick Coyne has been capturing the elusive phenomenon for the past few years.
It's very random when it does happen, and there's really no way to predict it. The only way that we really know that it potentially might happen is if we see a red tide during the day.
Bioluminescence is caused by dinoflagellate algae, which during the day turns the ocean red, but at night glows blue when ruffled up. In some areas like Florida, it's more predictable to find, but due to various factors like tides and winds in California, it's a rare treat.
And 9 times out of 10, it leads to nothing. But obviously, it's that one time that makes it count.
In 2020, there was a super bloom, and Coyne, with some friends, spotted some dolphins swimming with the bioluminescence.
And obviously, I'd never seen dolphins swimming in bioluminescence before, which was just one of the craziest experiences I've ever personally had.
Coyne says finding and capturing the natural wonder is something he'll never get tired of. He loves the chase, experiencing it, and being able to share his footage. Jason Blair, NTD News, California.
If you have any news tips or feedback for the show, you can email us at eveningnews@ntd.com.